we've touched the planet in so many ways that, cities have a huge ecological footprint, right? Both physically and indirectly, through the supply chains that they infect. Therefore, if we just flip the narrative about, what does it mean for cities to be green? Maybe we should think of what does it mean for built environments to be green? And that is really a big part of the earth now. Built environment is everywhere where humans have touched the planet, right? Mm-hmm. It could be rural, urban, or anything in between. So, it really also borders, developments that we have at national parks, or seascapes, even where humans are living. So I think we should take a broader worldview here and say, how should, conservation and perhaps built environment and development be thinking about coexistence.
Welcome to the Mongabay newscast. I'm your co-host, Mike DiGirolamo, bringing you weekly conversations with experts, authors, scientists, and activists working on the front lines of conservation, shining a light on some of the most pressing issues facing our planet and holding people in power to account. This podcast is edited on Gadigal land. Today on the newscast, we speak with Anuj Jain, the director and principal ecologist at bioSEA, a consultancy that works with architects and land planners to shape built environments that are both ecologically sustainable and functional for people and wildlife. Cities are perhaps an unsung hero in the fight against biodiversity loss and climate change. Often seen as opponents of wildlife, they can, when planned properly, be efficient ways for humans to coexist and sustain modern societal amenities. But cohabiting and integrating native vegetation and fauna into their infrastructure has been historically done poorly by many cities across the globe. The city-state of Singapore has been working to change that, and with impressive results. Today, the nation is 47% green space and reclaimed or protected vegetation. How the city arrived at this point is a long story that cannot be fully described in a single podcast episode, but today's guest explains the how and the why behind the philosophical and practical mindsets and methods that the nation has incorporated in creating this revitalized urban wildlife interface. Jain details the numerous benefits this has for both humans and biodiversity, such as efficient water usage, climate regulation and heat mitigation, biodiversity protection, and just generally being much more pleasant to live in and be around. He discusses the challenges both Singapore and other cities face in the global context of our biodiversity and climate crises, and the mindset shifts required to reform our cities. Personally, I found Jain's description of Singapore to be captivating, and he more than makes the case for any city to incorporate many of the practices that Singapore has been using to make their city more livable, breathable, and beautiful. Anuj, welcome to the Mongabay newscast. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Mike. It's a pleasure.
So you're in the city-state of Singapore, which is the subject of our conversation today. And this city has revitalized to be 47% green space. This is a pretty unique feat. And my research tells me that back in the 1880s, only 7% of the city's forests remained. So that's the city has come a long way. So can you tell me why Singapore started revitalizing the urban wildlife interface and what it was like before it really started undertaking this effort?
Yeah, you're right, Mike. Singapore has gone through a radical change in the past 200 or so years. And in fact, in the early 1800s, it had lost most of its original forest cover, which was down to less than 1% by the turn of the century, largely lost to agriculture, such as gambia, rubber, And we celebrate the Singapore Botanic Gardens as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And remembering and acknowledging that the gardens actually played a key role in, establishing the rubber industry in Singapore and the region.
Mm-hmm.
But, over time, as, a lot of land was lost to agriculture, this happened largely in the 1800s, 1900s. But since Singapore became independent in 1965, it's also gone through a lot of changes, right? We should remember, though, that this place is tropical, right? It's a small island state, 700 over square kilometers, just 1 degree north of equator, densely populated. And just for our international audience, the population is about 5.9 million. So you can imagine it's very densely populated.
Yeah. Singapore is among the most densely populated countries in the world. However, it's a city-state, so it averages much higher than other nations because of this fact. The official government data set lists 8,207 people per square kilometer. For comparison, New York City has about 11,314 people per square kilometer. And on the far end of the spectrum, Manila in the Philippines has 43,611 people per square kilometer.
So, in this density, as Singapore became independent, a lot of land had to be then used for urbanization, right? So since independence, really urbanization has picked up, and which is typical of any young city, really. There's more need for land, more housing, more commercial development. But in all this, as there was a lot of secondary forest which was left after urbanization. This is the real change in a way. A lot of places which are big, right? Our forests are outside, and the city becomes very dense and urbanized. Whereas for Singapore, it's an island state, right? So 700 kilometers or so is all that we've got. So.
Right.
As the city grew, from its former land use clearing, which was largely agriculture based, as the economy intensified, a lot of that agriculture was abandoned, right? Secondary forests grew. And as I was telling earlier, this is tropical. So if you leave the land, right, very quickly, it becomes secondary forest. And I think that was the difference. A lot of land was left, due to initially low population pressures. As that slowly matured, right, that became secondary forest. So when urbanization picked up, slowly some of that land was converted into urbanization, but a significant chunk was actually still left for secondary forests, for different land use types, including military, including as reserve land, which may be developed in the future. And so that's where we are, really. We still have 40% of land that is vegetated or green. Small percentages of primary forest, over 18 to 20% of secondary forests, and the remaining bits are really, parks and gardens. I should point out also that as Singapore became independent, the greening efforts were conscious. Our founding father and first Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew, really liked, the city to be green, both as a way to, have a more pleasant environment for people and investors as they come into the city state, and personally, he's a fan of gardening. So that really, changed how the government saw greenery. There's a lot of, streetscape, cityscape planting, to green the city. The streets, parks, and gardens were created at that time. And fast forward, many of these policies have continued to stay, through the National Parks Board, which has continued to, champion the cause of urban greening over the years, past 30, 40 years, through many targeted programs now, such as, creating a city in a garden, so to speak. And more recently, as they say, the 1 million tree planting campaign.
Hey, and thanks for tuning in to listen to the first few minutes of this interview. There's a lot more to it. So if you want to hear the full conversation, find the Mongabay newscast wherever you get your podcasts from and click subscribe. You can also get each new episode straight to your inbox by subscribing to Mongabay's weekly newsletter at mongabay.com. If you really want to help support us, you can also donate to us at patreon.com/Mongabay. Don't forget to leave a review. And thank you as always for listening.